Alright, last one. Not doing any more of these. Because we have finally arrived at the government, the people who officially make all the decisions and thus can take all of the blame for their failures. So let's start with the Prime Minister, who was made so prominent only thanks to George I not speaking English, and thus the Prime Minister took the major role of government. Many wonder why he also never got a Gaddafi-style mansion, and that's because number 10 Downing Street was given to the Prime Minister Robert Walpole by George II. Mr. Walpole is generally considered the first Prime Minister and the longest-serving Prime Minister. It was this dude in the 1700s who would set out the features of this now most powerful role in the kingdom, namely, quote, the division between the monarch and the monarch's first minister, the former remained as head of state, but the latter became the head of government. Yet the role of Prime Minister is famously regarded as whatever the minister makes of it. Number 10 isn't just for the Prime Minister, of course. There have always been advisors. This would be formalised in the 70s into the Central Policy Review Staff, now called the Number 10 Policy Unit, which they can staff with whomever you want. Thatcher filled it with political advisors, Cameron filled it with civil servants, and May with think tank nerds. You can also appoint a Chief of Staff. Mrs. May had two, who can be given orders to instruct civil servants, or be gatekeepers to yourself to keep people away. Or you can do a Blair and set up a Performance and Innovation Unit, the Delivery Unit, the Forward Strategy Unit, or be like Mrs. May and set up 7 cabinet implementation task forces. The point is, the Prime Minister makes the office and any weird rules that they want to. This is thanks to the funny thing that, quote, the Prime Minister is the most powerful person in government, but exercises no statutory powers. Rather, the powers exist by convention. Which brings us to the main thing you probably know that they do, appointing ministers, shuffling and dismissing them. Primarily cabinet ministers, the heads of government departments, who gather wherever and whenever the Prime Minister wants to, and we'll discuss what the Prime Minister wants to. There are currently 22 of these people, with another 4 attending for political reasons, the Chief Whip needs to know what's going on, or legal reasons, the Attorney General. But you may have noticed that a lot more people get called ministers. In fact, currently there are 123 ministers, of which legally only 109 can be paid. The other janitors do it for free. Some of these are literal memes, like the minister without portfolio, who gets paid but has no duties other than attending cabinet and voting. In reality, of course, this is so someone like the party chairman can attend. However, most of them are somewhat important roles. Those most important can be seen in this handy graph of who the PM decided would be a good fit. Remember, this is a political system and not a business, so being a good fit more often means good politically, not competence in a specific field. Although that's always a bonus. The PM is also automatically the Minister for the Civil Service, and naturally has the power to create, abolish, or merge any department. So for those of us wondering why Conservative PMs keep around the Tony Blair Soviet-valued Equality Department, nothing is stopping them from reform. The PM also formally advises the monarch as to who should receive honours and be appointed to public posts in the gift of the crown. Those who have assisted you are always a good shout, but heads of the security services, the armed forces, and the BBC are a little more serious. There are also bishops of the Church of England, and most joyously, the Regius Professors, royally appointed professors of universities like Oxford or Cambridge, dating back to the 1500s. The PM would also advise the monarch as to when a general election should be held. The power rested with the Crown, until the 2011 Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which now means 2/3 of MPs must vote for an election or pass a motion in no confidence in Her Majesty's government, which is hilarious, because it leads to situations like under Mrs. May, where she had to consider calling a motion of no confidence in herself to force an election. Back to the cabinet, though. Like the Lords, this one also begins as the King and the Boys, in the form of the Privy Council, which we still have today. But this got too big to be able to keep a secret, so the Foreign Committee of the Privy Council was set up to manage those matters. And that sideshow became the main show, becoming the Cabinet Council, or Cabinet. Meanwhile, the Privy Council has become a sideshow. You may think this more important cabinet would have been a paragon of professionalism in the defence of the realm. Of course not. Quote, the cabinet met regularly at dinner, with members taking it in turn to be host. These were not the most efficient means of dispatching business. One member thought, we should have no cabinets after dinner. We all drink too much wine and are not civil to each other. Sleeping was common, and it is claimed that most members were asleep when the decision to invade the Crimea was taken. There were problems with maintaining secrecy, not least as the body grew in size to about 15 members in 1850, and because waiters could hear what was discussed. The meetings themselves could be fairly discourteous, as there was relatively little business to discuss. Quote, "The pressure of government business was slight. Even under Rosebery, at the end of the century, a large part of the cabinet session could be spent discussing the exact text of one of Juvenal's satires. No consistent records were kept. Implementation rested on ministers' recollections of what had actually been decided. The libertarian dreamland. Whilst we were at our prime, our leaders were so drunk they didn't interfere with anybody's lives. These days, not so much. The PM can organise departmental committees, who formulate most policy, and when their minister presents it to Cabinet, the Cabinet vote if to send it to Parliament to be made law. This is also the place for this government of ministers to resolve any disputes between each other on policy, constrain the PM if they believe he is doing something mad, unify the government as one cohesive body, and unify the parliamentary party, the MPs all in the same party as the government. Ministers become representatives of the differing, bickering factions. Ministers can also get free will to generate policy. The PM can only focus on a few issues at any given time, of course. But the greatest threat to the government issuing the policy they have in their mind is the civil service. Quote, "There are various means available to officials to influence what a minister sees and considers. Civil servants carry out the decisions of ministers, but they may have a considerable influence over the decisions. Indeed, in some cases, it was argued that in certain departments, for example, the Home Office, it appeared that officials effectively ran the department, and ministers were seen as obstacles to its smooth running. There have been attempts to reform this front to the will of the voting citizens, but as long as we expect our state to do any more at a national level than a few hundred people can keep an eye on, this will continue. But the point being that whilst the PM is very powerful, they are only such when all these things are in harmony. Most trouble comes from cabinet unrest to the PM's will." Quote, "When David Cameron was contemplating announcing an emergency break when migration by EU nationals reach unacceptable levels, as part of his attempt to renegotiate the UK's membership of the EU, he failed to carry the support of the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond and Home Secretary Theresa May, and, as a consequence, dropped it from his speech. As for civil servants' resistance, singularly it will come from the Cabinet Secretary, advising the PM that whilst their policy is marvellous, it cannot be implemented in the way that they wish. Collectively, from the fact that they are a bunch of leftist, city-dwelling, cuckold, self-hating the last place the PM's power has been restricted is in the hollowing out of the state, policy-making decisions being handed over to subnational and supranational bodies. It's also not like the PM can direct the flow of international markets, and on the international stage, the President of the United States is the first among equals, as it can be most politely put. Anyway, that is the government of Her Majesty's that runs our island kingdom, a career politician at the head of a group of 20-odd who owe their allegiance to the crown. There are more subnational and supranational aspects of this textbook, but much of it is irrelevant. Otherwise, I hope this series helped you in some way. It certainly made buying this thing seem a lot like less of a waste of money. Thank you and goodbye.